Today's gangster profile, Whitey Bulger and Steve Flemmi make their move. By the 1970s, with the cleans gone in South Boston, Whitey Bulger was a man alone on an island. Through his one contact in the Italian Mafia, J.R. Russo, he reached out and asked for a sit-down. The locations was Chandler's, the notorious wise guy hangout in Boston's South End. Bulger was looking to end hostilities with the Mullins, who were on the winning side of the Southie gang war. Whitey needed a new rabbi. Donald Clean was pushing out daisies, as they say, and Howie Winter was the new top dog on Winter Hill, and he was Bulger's best hope. At this time, Southie rackets were small scale and they weren't some big money-making machine. It affected gangsters outside Southie very little when the Irish hoods started killing one another. Bulger showed up to the meeting impeccably dressed in a three-piece suit. He wanted to make a good impression. He did so, and Howie thought that he was a capable guy. What could hurt from getting some extra money in the Winter Hill coffers from the Southie rackets and to have another capable guy around they could use for muscle? So Howie said sure, Whitey could join the Hill. He was now under their umbrella. Whitey would have to kick up a percentage from Southie to Howie, but he was free to run the rackets as he wanted, and the Mullins would back off as Pat Need, the leader who was present at the meeting, agreed. It was a win-win situation for Whitey. It was the only move he saw, and it was a good one. Little did Howie Winter know that Whitey was the type of person that would never be satisfied by simply being a member of a crew. He had much bigger aspirations. Bulger was as devious and treacherous as they come. This was not a shrewd move by Howie. After the 1960s gang war, the Hill was aligned with the Italian Mafia, and they would become the second most powerful faction in the Boston underworld. They became a kind of home from orphans from the 1960s gang war. Anyone who wasn't of Italian heritage or who didn't want to become a part of the Mafia hung out with the Hill. Even though they were a patchwork from pieces of other gangs, they still had hardcore members: Howie Winter, Joe McDonald, and Jimmy Sims, all of Somerville. But others, like Johnny Motorano of the East Milton crew. Alright, there was no East Milton crew, but Motorano, a young gangster who was under the tutelage of notorious killers Joe Barbosa and Jimmy the Bear Flemmi, and he learned their craft well. During the 70s, when they were gone from the Boston streets, he became close friends with Howie Winter, and would go on to become one of Winter Hill's most infamous killers. Another notorious Boston gangster that clung onto the Winter Hill gang in the 1970s was Steve the Rifleman Flemmi. Steve Flemmi, before the gang war, was a member of Wimpy Bennett's Roxbury crew. That is, before Wimpy and his two brothers met their untimely demise at the hands of Flemmi and friends. After the failed attempt to kill Joe Barbosa's loyal John Fitzgerald with a car bomb, Steve Flemmi and his partner Cadillac Frank Slemmi went on the lam. Flemmi hid out in the Canadian city of Montreal and its sizable Italian population. He worked a legit job as a printer's apprentice. Frank Slemmi hid out in New York City. Now, you would think that the largest city in the country would be an easy place to blend into, but for some reason Frank's luck wasn't as good as Stevie's. While walking outside his apartment by Central Park in Manhattan, Frank Slemmi just happened to bump into a young FBI agent, John Connolly, who made a heroic arrest. Slemmi was off to prison for a couple decades, and John Connolly punched his ticket home to Boston with his high-profile arrest, which is exactly where he wanted to be. Flemmi stayed in Montreal in peace until he was told the coast was clear and he returned to Boston. Now, was it just coincidence that Flemmi stayed free and Slemmi went to prison? Or might have been considered so, but this continually happened throughout Flemmi's criminal career. The real reason was that Flemmi was Jack from South Boston, or that's at least what his FBI paperwork called him. The rifleman remained free because, like his brother, he joined the FBI's new top echelon informant program. It wasn't dumb luck that kept him a free man. It was his relationship with the corrupt FBI agent H. Paul Rico. Steve Flemmi was a huge score for Rico because of his Italian heritage and his deep ties into the Boston underworld from being a member of Wimpy Bennett's crew since the 1950s. Flemmi knew all the players in the Boston underworld and was a treasure trove of information. Flemmi had a working relationship with the Italian Mafia, but he wasn't a made man. He was free to team up with whoever he wanted to in the Boston underworld. This is exactly the type of the person the feds were thinking of when they created the top echelon program. None of Flemmi's contemporaries thought he was an informant. As far as people were concerned, his luck was just better than Slemmi's. So these two orphans of the Boston underworld were now members of the loose confederation that was the Winter Hill Gang. It's that old saying that water seeks its own level. Whitey and Stevie seemed to be naturally drawn to one another. They were odd compared to their other gang members. They were referred to Whitey and Stevie as health freaks. They exercised regularly and ate healthy. Whitey had a beer once in a while, but he didn't like to get drunk like the other members of the gang. Whitey was the type of guy who would rather spend his nights alone in the dark watching war documentaries and plotting schemes. Steve Flemmi was also obsessed with his health and appearance, but he was consumed by females. He was certainly a sexual addict and he was a bit of a deviant. But from the beginning, the two of them hit it off, and they could be seen at the gang's headquarters on Marshall Motors on Winter Hill, huddled together talking secretly. The other gang members thought they were odd, especially Whitey, but they thought he was good at planning and executing missions, and they liked his gadgets and his new technology he had. In 1975, FBI agent John Connolly, in an attempt to boost his own profile in the Boston FBI office, was looking to net a big-name informant. Using his Southie roots as their commonality and a bonding point, Connolly proposed this arrangement to Bulger at a beach in South Boston. His pitch was successful. Bulger, who was a former bank robber and had done time at Alcatraz, but he was little known outside of South Boston. From the moment Bulger became Connolly's star informant till the time he went to prison, Connolly spent every waking moment trying to cultivate the Bulger myth and raise his profile in the Boston underworld as well as in the FBI. Bulger was a certified informant, yes, but he never really gave the FBI any useful information. That's because he had none. Outside of Southie, he wasn't a big shot, not even at the height of his power. He was not the kingpin that he'd been painted to be. That was a creation of FBI agent John Connolly and the media. Bulger controlled Southie, which was basically a backwater in the Boston underworld. What happened in Southie affected the rest of the underworld very little. Steve Flemmi was the one that gave the FBI any useful information. When the Feds successfully wired Anjulo, Happy Trolls, Doghouse for sound, and brought down the patriarchal underboss, it was Flemmi that drew the map of his office, not Whitey. But Connolly attached it to Bulger's file to up Bulger's importance in the eyes of the Feds. It was all, as the kids on the internet say, cap. By the late 1970s, Winter Hill Gang had a good working relationship with the Italian Mafia. When the Mafia got into a beef with Indian Al's Medford crew, the Hill eliminated them completely. The Hill was moving into what they thought would be the profitable sports betting racket, especially football betting, and the football parlay cards that I'm sure the majority of my viewers have played. The only thing was that they weren't very good at it. Howie Winter and Joe Morano would regularly get drunk and bet large amounts of their own money and lose their shirts. After they borrowed $100,000 from Jerry Anjulo the second time to cover their football losses, they could tell the relationship was straining a little bit. Looking for a new venue to make some quick money, they hooked up with one fat Tony Shula. Tony Shula was a notorious swindler and con man and also a compulsive degenerate gambler. Tony's specialty was fixing horse races by any means necessary. They would dope horses, bribe jockeys, and even threaten the jockeys with violence for non-compliance. Howie was desperate to fill the Hill's coffers, so he brought Shula in. Another bad choice. Shula was no good. He was a degenerate gambler, and people like that tend to be desperate and do desperate things. When he got caught red-handed trying to fix a race, he quickly turned state's evidence and let the authorities in on the scope of the operation. He fingered the entire Winter Hill Gang as co-conspirators and the muscle behind the operation. Whitey and Stevie were implicated as well, but they were mysteriously left off of the indictment. The urging of the FBI Boston office, Steve Flemmi and James Bulger were left off of the indictment. They were described as vital in the FBI's effort to take down the Italian Mafia in Boston, so U.S. Attorney Jeremiah O'Sullivan kept them off. Every other member was indicted. Killers John Morano and Joe McDonald, along with wheelman Jimmy Sims, went on the lam. Howie Winter would be sent to federal prison. Now, how everyone in Boston Underworld, let alone their fellow Winter Hill Gang members, didn't suspect them of monkey business, I just don't understand. Their own gang members who saw them regularly whisper to one another did think this was extremely suspicious that these two were not indicted with everyone else. And other people in the underworld, like the Italian Mafia, should have seen this as just a gigantic red flag. Almost as soon as the others went away, Whitey and Stevie moved their headquarters from Marshall Motors on Winter Hill in Somerville to a garage on Lancaster Street in the west end of Boston. Neither Whitey or Stevie had any connection to Winter Hill or Somerville whatsoever. They were still referred to as the Winter Hill Gang, but this was Whitey and Stevie's gang now, 100%. It had absolutely nothing to do with Winter Hill or Somerville anymore. Lancaster Street is a little side street between North Station and Haymarket Square. If you've ever smoked a joint before a game or a concert at the Boston Garden, you've probably been standing in front of Whitey's old headquarters and not even known it. That's how close it was. It was also curiously close to the giant federal building where the FBI office was located. Also, and probably to Jerry Angiulo's chagrin, it was less than a mile from his Prince Street office in the North End. There was Massachusetts State Police surveillance photos of Donato Danny Angiulo and Larry Bayonne coming to check out the new headquarters on Lancaster Street. There was no bad blood between Whitey, Stevie, and the Mafia, but I'm sure they were a little suspicious of them setting up shop so close to the North End. It also says something that such high-ranking mafias came to them instead of vice versa. This really got the state police's attention. It's clear that Whitey always had bigger aspirations than just being a gang member of Winter Hill. He didn't want to answer to anyone. From the first meeting at Chandler's, he was calculating, scheming, and plotting his way to the top. Aided by the corrupt FBI agent John Conley, who continually protected him from other law enforcement agencies' investigation, Whitey was easily able to manipulate Steve Flemmi, who was the one who had the information that the FBI really wanted. How the two discovered their common bond as FBI informants, I'm not completely sure, but I am certain that they were two of the most devious and treacherous men in Boston Underworld's history. They played most of their contemporaries and took advantage of others' misfortune. By the 1980s, Whitey and Stevie were firmly in control of their own gang. Patrick Nee, the leader of the Southie gang, the Mullins, was more concerned with aiding the IRA than the Southie rackets, so they were all Whiteys. They owned the Winter Hills interest too, and now seeing a void in the Boston underworld, they started muscling in on people. Any independent bookies, loan sharks, or drug dealers were being taxed. Now I gotta throw it out there, that even at the height of his power, Whitey was small time compared to the Italian Mafia. He never at any time ruled the whole entire city. But that being said, he did carve out a nice piece for himself. Rat, woman beater, deviant, yes. But he was playing chess when a lot of other gangsters were playing checkers. It was clear as day to Howie Winter when he got out of prison what time it was. Howie figured he was owed something when he got out because he was the boss when he went away. But not so anymore. Whitey was ice cold to Howie. This was his gang now and Howie had no place in it anymore. As a favor, Whitey hooked him up on a cocaine deal, which Winter was subsequently set up on, was sent back to prison where he couldn't bother Whitey. Howie couldn't believe he let this scumbag into his gang. He was sick to his stomach. Whitey played him like a fiddle. Whitey and Stevie weren't the kind of guys you wanted as friends or enemies. They were dangerous, devious, and treacherous, all characteristics that get you to the top in the underworld. Now I hope you liked this video. This is just a chapter in a saga, folks. Now if you like this video, hit that like button, leave a comment, make a request. Subscribe if you haven't yet. We're closing in on 500. Let's go! But most of all, guys, remember, take good care of yourselves. Have a great day.